I've always loved the thrill of adventure, but my journey to Alaska last winter was the kind of adventure I wouldn't wish on anyone. I was drawn to the desolate beauty of the Alaskan wilderness, enticed by the promise of solitude and a break from the grind of daily life. It was supposed to be a week-long getaway, a chance to clear my mind, to breathe in the crisp, cold air, and to marvel at the untouched snow. But that week quickly became a nightmare that haunts me to this day. I arrived in Anchorage and rented a small, off-road capable vehicle, equipped with everything I thought I'd need. I planned to drive out to a remote cabin I had booked, nestled deep in the woods, far from any sign of civilization. The locals had warned me about the unpredictable weather, but I was confident in my skills. After all, I had survived solo trips before, though none quite this ambitious. The drive was breathtaking at first. Towering snow-covered pines, mountains looming in the distance, and the pristine silence of the forest all around. But as I ventured further into the wilderness, the roads became less distinct, and the sky began to darken much sooner than I expected. The air grew colder, and a heavy snow began to fall, reducing visibility to almost nothing. I pressed on, telling myself that the cabin wasn't much farther. My GPS showed I was on the right path, but the snowstorm intensified, and soon I could hardly see a foot in front of the car. I started to regret my decision, wishing I had stayed closer to the main road. The snow piled up quickly, and my tires struggled to maintain traction. Panic set in when I realized I had no idea how much longer the storm would last or how far I had left to go. Suddenly, a loud thud jolted the car, and I felt the front tires sink. I had driven straight into a deep snowdrift. I tried to reverse, but the wheels spun uselessly. I was stuck. My heart raced as I realized my predicament. Alone, miles from any help, with a blizzard rapidly burying my vehicle. I tried to keep calm and remember my training. I had packed an emergency kit, and I knew better than to leave the vehicle in such a storm. I bundled up in my heaviest gear, dug out the small shovel I had packed, and started to dig around the tires, hoping I could free the car. But the snow was relentless, filling in the space almost as quickly as I could clear it. Hours passed, and the temperature continued to drop. My fingers and toes grew numb despite my thick gloves and boots. I knew I couldn't last much longer out in the cold, so I climbed back into the car, blasted the heater, and prayed for the storm to let up. But instead of subsiding, it grew fiercer. The wind howled, rocking the vehicle, and the snow was now piling up against the windows. As night fell, the darkness outside became almost tangible. The headlights barely pierced the thick wall of snow. I tried the radio, hoping to get some weather updates, but all I got was static. I felt utterly alone in that moment, swallowed by the storm and isolated from the world. Then I saw it, a shadow moving through the snow. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I squinted into the blizzard, trying to focus. There it was again, a dark figure moving against the white backdrop, too deliberate to be just blowing snow. My heart pounded as I realized it was coming closer. It seemed to glide, almost floating above the snow, heading directly for my car. I reached for my flashlight, shining it out into the storm. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a figure cloaked in fur, but I couldn't make out a face. It stopped just a few feet from the car. My breath fogged up the window as I stared at it, waiting for it to move. Seconds felt like hours. Then slowly it lifted a hand and pointed towards the forest. I didn't understand at first, but the figure continued to point, almost beckoning me to follow. Was it a person? Someone from a nearby village? Or was it something else? Something that wasn't quite human? My mind raced with possibilities, but my instinct was to stay put, to not leave the car. But then I remembered the stories I'd heard, the tales of spirits and beings that guided lost travelers to safety. As the figure continued to motion towards the woods, I weighed my options. Stay in the car and risk freezing to death, or follow this mysterious figure into the unknown. I had no idea which was the right choice, but my gut told me to follow. Maybe it was foolish, but I felt an unexplainable trust in that figure, a strange sense of calm washing over me. I grabbed my emergency pack, wrapped myself tightly in my coat, and stepped out into the storm. The cold was immediate and biting, but I pushed forward, keeping my eyes locked on the figure. It moved slowly, making sure I could follow, leading me deeper into the forest. My visibility was limited, but I trusted the figure's guidance. After what felt like hours of trudging through knee-deep snow, I saw it, a faint, warm light in the distance. A cabin. I nearly cried with relief. The figure stopped and pointed towards the cabin, then slowly began to fade into the storm. I shouted a thank you, but it didn't respond. It simply vanished, leaving me alone in the dark again. I hurried to the cabin and pounded on the door. To my surprise, it swung open easily, and I was greeted by a blast of warm air. The inside was lit by a crackling fire, with blankets and supplies neatly arranged. It looked almost like someone had been expecting me. I rushed in, slammed the door shut, and collapsed near the fire, shivering uncontrollably. I stayed in that cabin for 2 days until the storm finally passed. No one ever came by, and I never saw the figure again. When I finally made it back to town, I told my story to a few locals, but they just nodded solemnly. One old man told me that the forest had spirits, some that guided, and some that led travelers astray. I still don't know what that figure was or why it led me to the cabin, but I'm grateful I trusted it. I later found out that the area where my car was stuck was notorious for its deadly blizzards, and many travelers had died there over the years. Whatever it was, it saved my life. But I'll never go back to those woods. I know better now. Some things in this world can't be explained, and some places hold onto their secrets tightly, only revealing them when it's far too late. After returning to town, I couldn't shake the experience. I kept replaying it in my mind, the figure, the cabin, the feeling that I was being watched. I needed answers. Over the next few days, I spoke to more locals, trying to piece together what had happened to me. One evening, an old woman, one of the village elders, invited me to her home. She had heard my story and wanted to share something with me. She spoke of ancient legends, tales passed down through generations about the spirits that roamed the Alaskan wilderness. She described them as guardians of the land, protectors who appeared in times of dire need to guide lost souls to safety. But she warned that these spirits were unpredictable. Some were benevolent, like the one I encountered, while others were vengeful, punishing those who disrespected the natural world. She showed me a faded photograph of a group of people standing outside what looked like the same cabin I had stayed in. She pointed to one figure in the back, a tall man dressed in fur, his face partially obscured by a hood. My heart stopped. It was the same figure I had seen in the snow. The photograph was over 100 years old. The old woman explained that the man in the photograph was a shaman, someone who could commune with the spirits of the land. He had vanished in a storm much like the one I experienced, but stories told of him still guiding lost travelers to safety, even after his death. I had never believed in ghosts or spirits before, but after what I'd been through, I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. I left Alaska a few days later, my mind heavy with everything I had learned. As the plane lifted off, I took one last look at the endless expanse of snow-covered wilderness below. Somewhere out there, I knew the spirits still roamed. And I couldn't help but wonder how many other lives they had touched. How many stories remained untold in those frozen silent woods. I'll never forget the figure in the storm, the silent guardian who appeared when I needed them most and vanished without a trace.